Now let's look at validity and soundness. I covered this in the meta-theories lecture when we looked at affirming the consequent, the fallacy of affirming the consequent. I'm not going to go over affirming the consequent again. That would definitely fall within the, would fit in the context of this discussion, but I don't think it's as important as validity and soundness, and that's why I reiterate them here. Validity and soundness are, essential to critical thought and analysis and argumentation. So what is validity and soundness? Validity states that if the premises are true, the conclusion must follow, or that the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. And remember, the basic argument structure is premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, etc., conclusion. Premises are just the statements. So let's look at, this is an argument we used, an argument for relativism. This is a valid argument. If there is diversity, there is no objective right or wrong. There is diversity. Therefore, there is no objective right or wrong. That is a valid argument because if those premises are true, then the conclusion necessarily follows. We're saying that there's diversity, and if that's the case, there is no objective right or wrong. Well, that is the case, therefore, there is no objective right or wrong. So, soundness. Soundness says that if an argument is valid and the premises are true, then the argument is sound. Or that if the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises and the premises are true, then the argument is sound. The argument we just gave was valid, but it's unsound. What's wrong with it? Well, premise 2 is correct. There is diversity of moral opinion. But premise 1 is incorrect. It says that if there is diversity, there is no objective right or wrong. This is because there could be objective right or wrong, and there still be diversity. It might be the case that only one group of people holds true objective right or wrong, or that nobody believes in objective right or wrong, and that just nobody has access to it even though it exists. So that's validity and soundness. So analogy and false analogy. Charles S. in our textbook Digital Media Ethics calls this questionable analogy. I think I've heard false analogy. I just kind of like that, but his term may be more accurate. But this is on pages 70 through 72. You can read about his discussion of this fallacy. So an analogy, I mean, you probably know this, but an analogy is a comparison of two things. It's saying something, it's not a comparison, but it's saying something is like something else. And a false analogy is, or a questionable analogy is an incorrect use of that. So let's go back to the unlicensed file downloading example. And we used an analogy there. We said unlicensed downloading music is like stealing a CD from a store. I think there's a strong case that this is a false analogy. For the following reason. Making an unlicensed copy of digital music may have the same results for the person doing it as it does for the person stealing a CD. They both are getting something for nothing. So in that sense, there's some accuracy. But when you download unlicensed music, unlike when you steal a CD from a store, you're not depriving the owner of capital. They still have the option of selling that information. Whereas the store owner does not have the option of selling the CD you stole. I mean, think of it as like someone walking into a CD store and with a CD burner or a magic cloning device and just made a copy of the CD and walked out with it. it seems like this analogy is illogical in its structure. I mean, that doesn't exclude the possibility or likelihood that downloading unlicensed files is wrong. It's just saying that comparing it to stealing a CD from a store is not a very good analogy. So that is analogy and false analogy. Necessary and sufficient conditions. We talked about this in the discussion board last week, week 5, I believe. And this again these are fundamentals of argumentation. Necessary conditions must be satisfied for a statement to be true, or a necessary condition must be satisfied for a statement to be true. A sufficient condition, if satisfied, assures the statement's truth. So this is kind of abstract, so to give it examples, most of this stuff starts to make sense when we use examples. That's how I always learn anyway. So let's look at a necessary condition. Observation of diversity in views of morality is a necessary condition for the meta-theory of relativism. It's part of the argument for relativism. It says that there is diversity of moral opinion. This diversity is an indication that, and there's no way for us to know whether or not there's moral truth. Therefore, there is no objective moral truth. Belief in the absence of any objective moral truths is a sufficient condition for the meta-theory of relativism. It's sufficient because that, pretty much in a nutshell, is what relativism is. It's the belief that there is no objective right or wrong. So, what's different about these? Well, observation of diversity just isn't enough to qualify for relativism. It's necessary it's a necessary part of relativism, but it's not enough, because all of the meta-theories we look at observe diversity in moral opinion. This is part of the reason why we develop meta-theories. Absolutism says there is diversity of moral opinion, but there can only be one correct interpretation. And pluralism likewise acknowledges that there is diversity of opinion about moral truths. So that's necessary and sufficient conditions.